You need to know what you want to know, and you need the price for this. And identification scheme can give you both. I want to completely encourage you to drop this fear.
Hey, Causal Bandits. Welcome to the Causal Bandits podcast, the best podcast on causality and machine learning on the internet.
Today we're traveling to Munich to meet our guest. His parents advised him not to take much risk, but he had other ideas. He was a child experimenter torn between chemistry, physics, and electrical engineering. During his studies, he dove deeply into information theory to fall in love with causality a few years later. He loves connecting with others and has an unparalleled drive for innovation. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Daniel Ebenhöch. Let me pass it to your host, Alex Molak.
Welcome to the podcast, Daniel.
Thank you for having me.
I'm very happy that you were able to join us today. Daniel, I want to start with a very particular question. In your opinion, what is the problem with the current approach to autonomous driving?
There is actually no approach at all. I mean, there is a theory that you basically need to drive millions of kilometers to basically get all the events in a natural environment possible, and that's simply not feasible. And you can break it down with simulation, but simulation has complexity issues, has issues to build it up properly, and yeah, something is missing. There is a gaping gap, to frame it.
How could we address this gap, in your opinion?
I think there is a framework. You probably, as you're looking in this podcast, or maybe are new to this topic, is basically like, I don't know the English expression, but in Germany we would say it's the best match. It's like eye-grabbing obvious to use causal models. Use a model which basically has all the distributions of natural things appear, and you model and play around with these distributions and answer queries. So my answer is we should look into the direction of causal models.
Is it because causal models are more efficient in describing the parameter space?
Exactly, and there is another property. Of course, you can incorporate the time into causal models, but for this, time is problematic. If you can keep time out of your equation, then you are much more efficient, because sometimes time is obvious that it has an impact. For example, when you go with your autonomous driving function and have a camera into a tunnel, then you have the logical sequence of, okay, it's light, then it's dark, and then it's light again. And this exact time sequence can make a difference. But for other things, time doesn't play a role. So you can more often than not take time out of your equation and just have the distribution of natural events and can combine them in a mechanism, to use this word. So you can use functions, you can use complex functions, you can use machine learning neural networks to model these things, and that you don't need to do it real time or even speed up real time like in simulation. You can combine the parameter space much more efficient, I would say, in short.
How did your journey into causality start?
Basically, I got interested, like so many, with Judea Pearl. So he was the first I read about, and he has this, special desire and burn inside, which catched me basically to say, hi, I have problems there. I mean, problems throughout the industry who are not solved. And this is a framework which looks so much matching to solve part or maybe all of these problems we have. I need to look into it. It has testable implications, so there was so many green flags to go deeper. And when I started to read the book of Why, I read it in the evenings. I read for many hours. It was one of the books when you are caught by something, you read non-stop. So you like, I'm happy for the next evening to continue my journey. So how I got into this.
Which parts of Pearl's framework were the most inspiring to you?
Inspiring was that it's a framework which basically has testable implications. So you are somehow on a safe ground. The other thing was that it allows to have counterfactual things. So you always experience the world in a factual way. So you have some recordings of, for example, driving maneuvers when it was sunny, but at the same time, maybe what would have been if it would rain. So this counterfactual aspect with probability of necessity and sufficiency, to go a bit deeper, was immanent to see that, that could be a solution to broaden your tool set to tackle these problems.
You mentioned counterfactuals. Do you think that counterfactuals are necessary to build autonomous agent, let it be driving agents or whatever other kind of agents that can act effectively in the world?
That's a tricky question. I need to frame it a bit. I want to come from really the causal direction. So we all know, or probably most of you know, the causal ladder. And in the causal ladder, you have this associative, this interventional, and this counterfactual rank. And it goes, everything mentioned first is incorporated in the second step. So if you do counterfactual, you incorporate interventional and associative. So you have everything basically. So to answer your question, I want to say, what is the difference between interventions and counterfactual? So the difference is, in interventions, you are the manipulator. You manipulate values to certain values to make sure it is like this. So you feed your causal model certain parameters and you say, calculate me the outcome exactly in this way.
But by it is like this, you mean making sure that the mechanism is the way that we expected it to be?
You fix the input of the mechanism, and that can be good in some scenarios, but in complex scenarios with autonomous driving, you are not sure for all your parameters to be fixed. But you want to incorporate knowledge you have from already observed data. And when it comes to counterfactual, you incorporate this knowledge. So you made this abduction step. You propagate your knowledge from an observation up to your background exogenous. They have many names, these variables. And you say, how does the distribution shift under this observation? And then only in the second step, you forward your causal model in this state you have set it through your observations. And I think this is much more mighty and more usable than simply fixing some interventional values to certain values and look for this parameter space, but also to incorporate what you already know. And I mean, it's a unique step you need to do in counterfactual queries.
Maybe you could give our audience, for those people who are not that familiar with counterfactual reasoning, a short definition of what abduction is.
Abduction is somehow upward propagation. So you have your network. You can imagine a tree network, for example. And you have an observation on a variable which is way down in the tree. So
it's caused by something. It's a child.
It's a child. It's a child.
Or a grandchild.
A grandchild. Exactly. It's the family ancestry, basically, when you think of the latest heritage of a heritage tree, and you observe something about him. For example, he has blonde hair. So you want to upflow this knowledge into your distributions. What could be, I mean, there is a distribution about to stay into this picture about his grandparents, great-grandparents. They still can be any hair color, but some phenotypes are more likely when this grandchild is blonde. And you want to basically update these distributions of the hair color or phenotypes of ancestors by this fact. This doesn't mean that you set it to a single value, so it's not necessary that all his grandparents need to be blonde, but the likelihood is shifted towards some phenotypes, and this is basically abduction.
We know that in order to compute counterfactual queries, we might require a very rich description of the system, a lot of information about the system. How do you deal with this challenge in practice?
You came straight into the greatest problem for the industrial use of causal models. So you have basically a two-legged way. You either spend a lot of engineering and time and effort and resources to make a full specified causal model. We use the structural causal model framework because it incorporates any functional relationship you can think about it, so it's the most general. Of course, it needs also the highest effort to fully specified structural causal model with all the mechanisms, distributions you need, and you can either go there, you can decide, okay, we want to go there, then we are sure to answer any counterfactual query. So when you once decided that you are not specific, you need to answer many questions and you are not sure what it is, then you will need to go this way, or maybe you can strip the way a bit.
So this means that what you're saying, I understand as if we want something very general in the future, we need to put a lot of work today in order to make these guarantees for the future.
And then you can go on another branch. You can say, I'm very specific. I have 2-3 questions I want to get an answer to, and I will sit down, make a deck structure, and then we have an algorithm. It's called the identification algorithm. It's the ID, IDC, ID star, IDC star. And these algorithms, they can give you a simple answer. You just need to sit down and have the structure, and then they will tell you you can answer your question or you can't. So it's and then it tells you a second thing when it's answerable. So when the question is identifiable, to say this term, then it will give you basically also the recipe.
How to calculate the query.
How to calculate the query.
Mm-hmm.
And in this case, you can tell your boss, we need to collect data for this and that variable, and then we can answer you the query. Of course, this can be maybe too cumbersome to collect all this data. Then maybe, more often than not, maybe you ask a too difficult question, and maybe a decision can be done by a much easier question. And then we can maybe, model the question so that the effort outcome ratio is much more better for you. So there is, you can play with it. You can say, okay, this question may be too hard, too many data. Let's ask a smaller, easier question, less data. Okay, that's maybe a first step. If this question is negative, we don't need to know the more difficult question, right? Because we are already done.
This brings me to mind this idea of computing optimal decisions when it comes to the effort, the energy spent, we expect to gain from computing a given quantity. So this is something that we are also familiar with in science, especially engineering.
Definitely, yeah. I think to the capability to ask the right questions is half the goal, right? So if you know what you want to know, and if you know the price for each of these questions, so a scientist, he wants to know something, how much data he needs to collect, how much studies. I think of Humboldt, for example. He traveled half the world and collected so much data because he was curious to know something. So you need to know what you want to know, and you need the price for this. And identification scheme can give you both. Is your question answerable, and how much is the effort to get an answer?
With your team, you have been working on a very interesting project for some time already. Can you tell us a little bit more about this project?
Yeah, it started all in July 2020. Not everybody is very warm to remember, but it was in the heights of Corona time. So it was lockdown. We had a meeting on the rooftop terrace, keep distance and everything. And we started a public funded project. So it's half funded by the Bavarian Ministry of Economy and half by my company, EFS. And we were asking following question. To make this autonomous driving function safe, don't need to test, the vanilla basic tests, but you really need to get into corner cases. Corner case is a test case where at least 2 parameters coincide. And they coincide so that not each of these parameters is necessarily an extreme value, but by coinciding, by a middle value of air pressure and a middle value of temperature, something happens which only, when they came together.
By coincide, you mean that they interact with each other?
They interact with each other and they make something which is problematic. So each parameter alone is a piece of cake, but when they interact with each other, like, for example, rain and temperature, there can be a lot of rain. The street is okay for the wheels. There can be a low temperature and dry, no problem. But when it's -1 degree and slight rain, then you have a problem.
Those corner cases, what made you pay attention to them?
It came from my job at this point. I was test manager for autonomous driving function SAE level 3 and later SAE level 4. And there is exactly this question, where are these test cases we missing at some point, and what is the corner cases? So, and I thought using the causal framework, using the queries, and using the probability of necessity, the joint probability necessity and the joint probability of sufficiency can give a real, can guide the answer.
The team you are currently working with is a very diverse team. How is it to work with people with such different backgrounds on something as fundamental as causal learning or causal reasoning?
It's a pleasure, I can say. It's in some meaning very diverse, in other meaning it's not so diverse. So we have PhD physicians, physicists. We have mathematicians. They all have this, logical mindset to tackle problems in some different flavors. But we are diverse because we have also UX, UI designers who ask completely different questions. We have luckily a good mixture of female and male team members who, give their strengths in. So when it comes to strengths, we have a very multi-modal, to say it like this, team, yeah.
What are the main strengths that physicists are bringing to the table and mathematicians are bringing to the table?
I think that's a very good question, because they bring exactly some opposite side characteristics. Physicists are used to think critical and open-minded. So for them, nothing is a complete rule, but they try to challenge. And there is this principle: a theory in physics is only true if you can't falsify it. So they put everything on the table and say nothing is granted. And this is very good to be explorative, to not shy back and go in uncharted territory. On the other hand, mathematicians, they want their solid mathematical framework. They want something which is provable, which is which you can write down, which is not such a crazy idea like I confront my colleagues sometimes with, and they ask immediately, what's the proof? Where is a paper? I can read this. What is the background? So this and this plays well together, because it's fruitful to have some explorative minds and to have minds which bring you back to to the translation into mathematics and into algorithms, because in the end a fluffy idea doesn't bring you any algorithm.
Daniel, you mentioned physicists. Physicists are often accustomed with experimental work, and this experimental work often involves iterations. So we plan something, maybe it didn't work. We want to try again, changing something. We change something and we want to try again. I had a very interesting conversation with some of my guests, and they emphasized that this iterative culture is substantial to their work with causal models in reality. What is your view on this?
I couldn't agree more. Actually, when you work with causal methods, sooner or later you need a benchmark example. You need something which is understandable. And we all know this vector and frontal graphs where you have x, y, 4 nodes and some meaning. But we needed a benchmark model which is a bit more complex than this. But at the same time, we want to use it as a communication thing to show others, hey, that's the outcome of our work, or this could be. And we were thinking about, we made a dozen times the ice cream example on our slides, but we wanted to say something more difficult. But at the same time comprehensible. And then we started to think, we are working on autonomous driving. What can we do? Let's make a lane changing assistant. So we interviewed, I think, 30 plus people. What is the influencing factors about lane changing? We came across everything. It's, the lane simply disappears, so you need to change to, the one beforehand you is slower than you and you want to overtake him. So there are many influencing factors, and we worked hours and hours. I think we worked 150, 200 cumulated hours. And we had a huge model, which is, you need basically a textbook to explain this model. So you can easily, it's easier to get boundless with 100 plus nodes than to, contract yourself and look at the very minimal. So what's iterative on this? So you easily end up with very huge models, and you need to ask what really I want to model. What is the thing? And you need to first, there is in many directions an iterative workflow. You need to think about what I want to know. Then you can iterate over the structure. You need to incorporate all the structural information, because as we all know, when you have a missing link is a stronger indication than a link when there is a link between two variables, because in the end you can set it to 0, so there's no impact. So with the structure you need to iterate with the mechanisms. So mechanisms don't fall easily. I had a conversation with a colleague and he said, oh, it's so depressing, these mechanisms, this is so difficult to model them, to get the data. So you won't have an easy way to have everything at once, and you just need to think, what is the first goal I can make? I can make a substructure. I can make a Frankenstein structure, like I call it, where you put pieces together which it's not perfectly suiting, but maybe it comes a step closer. So causal models imply iterative mindset, I think. Yeah.
It sounds to me like one of those aspects that is important to you in your work is to build a prototype first, a prototype idea, and then try to find out which elements of this prototype are really necessary to answer the questions that we are interested in answering.
You're right, yeah. One thing is clear, you always need the target variable. So you need to make sure what variable, for example, the story goes a little bit further. We had this lane changing assistant, but lane changing is something not so easy to grasp, because you have a time domain there, because it's not, lane is changed, but you have different phases. And we think about, we rethought our thing and we made a emergency brake assistant. So we make an assistant with the environmental factors and say, what is the reason that he brakes in time, so there is no collision or there's a collision. So our target variable was, does a collision happen? And if yes, how strong was it? So how many centimeters or meters was the braking distance too short that an impact happened? So you are very sure, I think, 1 or 2 or 3 target variables. But with the environmental variables, you are completely right. You can add some things. For example, we figured out the temperature is one of the main drivers of our model, while the visual things, the visual sensoric, they seldom have an impact on the target variables. So they are almost neglectable. So you can think about, if it's almost neglectable, so the causal strength from this path is very low, maybe let's make an easier life and neglect this for the first iteration and think maybe our answer is also, our question is also answerable with a subgraph, yeah.
Mm-hmm. So we're coming back, in a sense, again to this place of making an optimal decision, or finding a trade-off between accuracy or precision and making something practically.
Exactly, that's a dilemma in the end. You need to be like somebody is balancing on a rope. I would always encourage to be more on the practical side, because you can so easily get lost if you want to have high standards of accuracy beforehand. Because if you need it, first make a short try, and like I said before, maybe you're already in a dead end, and all the accuracy you would have added at the first place is wasted time and effort. So I think you can be, if you're perfectionistic tendency, you can get lost easily, but causal models, they are a playing ground, you can make experiments and things with very low effort. And when you have the courage to neglect things, you can get easily questions which direct you. Like, we don't plan the journey beforehand and we know the goal, but we zigzag towards the goal, and with every iteration, with every structure, with every added mechanism, we get closer, but we also don't run too much effort in dead ends.
Many people who are starting with causality are intimidated by the fact that a DAG, or the graphical model that they might propose or they might come up with, might not be correct. And I heard this from many people, and it seems that for many of them, this is a blocker to start with causality and start applying it. What would be your advice to those people?
I heard it too, but I want to completely encourage you to drop this fear. Because a DAG is something written down about your assumptions. So assumptions are there anyway. So you won't do anything with data and with science and with making decisions without assumptions. You have them implicitly. We know all the stomach, our gut feeling. We don't make decisions without assumptions. And they are always there, but implicitly. And a DAG is the perfect tool to make this assumption explicit. And once you made it explicit, only maybe some say a thought is not so strong than a pronounced word, right? When you once get it to the light, it's changed a little bit how you think about it. And you don't need to keep all your assumptions in your mind and, have a memory overblast, but you write it down. You can sleep at night and revisit your assumptions. The assumptions are there anyway, but we make it explicit with a DAG. So you can only win. You won't lose anything. And if one wrong assumption deleted by your DAG, you already have made such a huge way forward you wouldn't have when you wouldn't use the DAG. So it's the perfect tool.
Causal Bandits, this advice is on fire. Beautiful, Daniel. You already have a working prototype of your solution that can be applied in automotive and in other industries as well, wherever decision-making is at stakes. I imagine that your path was not an easy one. What were the dead ends that you met on your road? A paths that you thought will lead you somewhere, but then you felt it doesn't lead us anywhere.
Oh, we had plenty of dead ends. Spontaneously, one comes to my mind. We were starting, like so many, with Bayesian models. This was at the time we started a framework which was comprehensible, which was inferable, where you had some theory and you could make your calculations. But we always had the feeling that Bayesian models, you always have the restriction somehow to be more prone to be discrete. You can't be always continuous. Otherwise, you have very special cases for your mechanisms. And we always had the feeling we want to be more general. We don't, want to make a tool or a set of many tools, and for each problem you have another tool. We want, as far as possible, to incorporate it. So we started to think, that there exists SCMs which have certain assumptions, even strong assumptions, like the independence of the background variables. But this is a framework which allows you discrete, continuous, mix of discrete and continuous, and every mechanism you could think about. To set this as our gold standard was, a first milestone on our project. But you ask for dead ends, and one of the dead ends was we want to, bridge the gap or make the connection between Bayesian models, which have always this conditional probability tables in the discrete case, and we want to reparameterize. Some of you who are deeper in this topic know this reparameterization trick, and we try to translate, the world of Bayesian models into the SCM world. And this was an idea to, reuse or basically just, to have some stability to connect these issues. And we implemented the reparameterization trick to, translate this conditional probability tables into a mix of fixed causal mechanisms and uncertainty. But this was a dead end because you brought two worlds together which don't match in the end. And we stick with the general SCM cage from then on.
What were your biggest discoveries on the way?
I would take out two discoveries. The first discovery is that basically abduction, the abduction step. It's close to the heart of everything you want to do with more or less completely defined SCMs. So when you want to basically have an observation and you want to propagate these observations, when you want to calculate the posterior of your distributions of your background variables, then you need abduction. And you need this so often to incorporate into your model certain observations and how the distributions of the background variable shift accordingly. And abduction, so you need to understand that abduction is very much at the heart. So you need this. And of course we calculated on pen and paper so many examples. With small examples, you can do it with pen and paper. As soon as it gets more complex, hence more nodes, more complex mechanism relationships, not linear but non-linear things and so on. And then it's not easy abduction. It's not so, these updates don't come natural. And first we were confident and looked at some methods, but they always had very big shortcomings. We looked at sampling methods, MCMC sampling, we looked at other sampling methods, and we looked at numerical methods, we looked at closed form integral methods, and all things have their perk, but many failed. So in the end we looked at 9 different methods for more than 1.5 years. And it was always so feeling, now we have it, it works, but then there was a disappointment at some moment. And it was a hard journey. And now I don't want to get bad luck from saying, but now I think we have found a method which fulfills the requirement that it's time efficient. You don't want to wait hours and days to have the abduction step, but it needs to be efficient. On the other hand, it needs to be as precise as possible. And of course, it should work for many different mechanisms, and it should work for many kind of distributions. And what we don't have, you want to have different kind of noise mechanisms, how the noise is incorporated. So of course you have the additive noise, but if you want to make a SCM, you have a general noise. So you have also a multiplicated noise, which is heteroscedastic scheme, or even more crazy functional relationship. And the higher the requirements on how do you want to incorporate it, the more difficult the question is how to make the abduction step in the end. And it's still something you need to research, you need to get better. If anybody has the solution, of course, I'm open-handed, but we really explored the field for a long time and very intensely.
I think this is a very interesting point, and I think many people in industry are also facing similar challenges. So your solution, if at some point you decide to make it public or share with a broader audience, broader community, I'm really sure that this will be very, very highly appreciated. To perform abduction step, we also need data. And your case in autonomous driving is one of the most complex ones probably that we can think of. How do you deal with this challenge, with looking for data, collecting the data?
It's not easy. You need data for the abduction step. I would say that is the best case, because usually you have some data points from maybe accidents happened or some records or maybe some synthetic data where you want to show something. But where you need a lot of data is to find the mechanisms. And there we look at public available data sets, huge data sets we can incorporate. Even experts can give you a guidance. Maybe this is a quadratic relationship between these two variables. Then you already have the form which you need to fit and only need to fit the parameters of this form. So you maybe have a better informed choice. So it's not easy to have all data to fit all the mechanisms, observations you have. And we try to compensate this with talking with those who make the test runs, going on the test field, having this data black boxes, let's call it, in the car to get some dumps there. Of course, they need to be coherent enough to incorporate it in a causal mechanism. Where it's not simply that you get the hard drive from this car and you're done, but it needs to be plausible data. They need to be plausible and connected, causally appropriate. And on the other hand, we have simulation. Simulation can also be a great data gatherer, because you can model something specific and use the data from the simulation to learn the mechanism. Of course, you can argue in some way the snake is biting its own tail, but I think simulation data and synthetic data can also be helpful to fill this gap. Yeah.
I want to take a step back and go back to what we discussed in the beginning of our conversation. We said that existing autonomous driving framework or frameworks come with a set of challenges or limitations. And one thing about which people talk in the industry is so-called long tails in complex distributions that might bring some unexpected events. What are your thoughts about this?
Yeah, great topic. Long tails are something, when you experience it, it's something your alarm bells immediately ring, because it's something you should look at when you're doing safeguarding autonomous systems, when you're doing testing, because time after time they will produce things where you stumble, and it's something basically where the people who are responsible can't sleep calm if something every time happens and still happens again. I first came to this when I was looking at the work of Taleb, a professor at New York State University, I think, about black swan, and there he discusses what long tails are. And I think we can very, very smoothly connect it with the structural causal model framework, because we can reverse the question. We can think long tails are a problem. Long tails you should have a look at, and we can say what structures, what mechanisms, what distributions constitute or plug together will produce in your target variable, like the impact of a car accident will produce a long tail in your target variable. So you can basically guide your search much more efficiently. You can pre-filter it, and you can, I always love to ask experts when it comes to causal models, because they can give you so much structural information, mechanisms, coincidences and things, which is all great implicit knowledge which you can incorporate into your causal model. And when you guide the experts and say, if this and that mechanism plays together, if this distribution comes, he will think, that's the natural distribution of this thing, and when this comes together with that mechanism, then we will have a long tail distribution in this target variable. Then we have a much more efficient process, a much more efficient thing to came towards this, this difficult to handle long tail things in practice. Yeah,
it sounds like a great idea to reduce or compress your search space. So if I understand you correctly, you're saying the following: you look at the distribution and say, hey, there's a long tail in this particular place or this particular variable or this interaction, and then you go back to the model and you look for the settings of the model, distributions or mechanisms that can produce a distribution like this, a long tail distribution, and then you triangulate your findings with the experts to narrow down the search space further. Is that correct?
Exactly. That's what it's just an idea. We need to look at what implications this has and how we can do this. But this would, in terms of parameter search in corner cases, a coincidence of two or more incidents like rain, fog, temperature conditions, which individually are no extreme, which won't take off the car. But if they work together, if they incorporate together, like -1 degree, no problem when it's dry, no much problem for the wheels. Slight rain, also no problem. But when -1 degree temperature and slight rain comes together, then you will have sudden ice on the street, and it's basically one easy example for a coincidence where you have a corner case. And these corner cases if you want to find them, you always have this huge multidimensional parameter. And if you can narrow it down, if you can make the search field smaller, you are very lucky because you have achieved something which is very difficult.
I want to ask you one more question related to what you said before. So when we talk about those corner cases and we talk about other difficult scenarios that we might encounter, then we ask ourselves questions like which basic questions I should ask to make sure that we can deal with those challenges. We'll often go back to the idea, this very basic idea in causality called identifiability. In your solution, how important this idea of identifiability is, and how did you tackle the challenges related to the fact that sometimes maybe we need to accept the fact that the system will have unobservable variables?
I wouldn't even say it's the unlikely case, so I think it's the likely case. That you have unobserved variables, that you have hidden confounding, that you have everything which you have not a completely defined causal models with all mechanisms, parameters where you can't collect data easily. So I think this is in most cases, depends. When you have a mechanical system where you know everything, then you are fine. But this is, I think, the more general case. And you still can work with it because you mentioned it, the identifiability. What is it? It tells you have a specific question. You have 1, 2, 3 specific questions. We can tell you, can you answer this question from this causal structure? So you, at first place, you need no data, no mechanism fitted. You just need to think about the structure. And we can tell you, and you need to think about your questions you want to answer in this domain, And then we can tell you, is this question, can we answer it from here? And we tell you also for which variables you need to collect data. And you can decide, okay, I take the effort and I am capable of collecting data for this variable. Then we can give a very good answer to this question. Or you say, oh, that's a huge data, it's not practical or too much cost and whatever thing to collect data for this. Maybe let's answer a easier question, but if the answer to this easier question is already no, we don't need to take the effort to answer the more difficult question. So we maybe are capable to replace your more sophisticated difficult question by 1 or 2 easier question. And if already one is the answer no, you don't need the effort to already make the second step. So this is a very good guidance in the jungle of decision making, and it's a great thing, to know what is ready to be made and what's the price behind the answer. Because when you don't know, when you start from the blank and don't know what's the price, for one question, the price is 1 month, one engineer sitting down, okay, and for another, it's maybe 2 years, and I don't want to spend the money and the resources and effort maybe in another. So the price for answers, the price for good decisions, we can give them a price tag.
That's an excellent point, and I'd love everyone to hear that. Many people who are just starting with causality, they have this fear about drawing a wrong DAG, but the second fundamental fear is that they will have in their system some unobserved variables that they cannot record and add to the system. The point of view that you just presented, and from the point of view of more advanced identification algorithms, we know that this is not always and not necessarily a roadblock. Daniel, what would be your advice for people who are just starting with something, maybe machine learning or causal inference, or they want to start working in industry, and they feel a little bit unsure if they will be able to learn everything that is needed to be successful in those fields?
All right, you asked me for characteristics. My first thought was, I'm honestly not because I'm standing in front of you, but your book is a great introduction. So we have a working student in artificial intelligence. She makes her bachelor at the moment. And he learned from your book, and she gave the feedback on presenting some part that it's great introduction. So if you want to learn the theory, then, or the theory and the practical application and have a great overview, your book is, I think, one of the first addresses to look at. When it comes to characteristic, I think resilience is an important thing, because causal inference isn't exercise which is practiced with ease. I mean, sometimes when you have done all your homework, your preparation, then you might be striving, but it's nothing which comes so easy to you. So you should be resilient. You should have frustration tolerance to keep being sneaky, to be confident that finally you will have something better you had before. So that, I think, are very important characteristics. Of course, they apply also to other fields, but here I would highlight them because it's not a chartered field. So you need to experiment, you need to play around. So experimental mindset, I would mention. Maybe also playfulness. So, let's start with the first little deck. Let's see what it can bring us, and let's iterate. And from the starting point, let's be curious, let's be playful, let's be experimental.
Who would you like to thank?
Oh, I really own thanks a lot of people. Before of all, I want to thank my team. So I hope I don't forget anybody now. It's Clara, it's Toby, it's Claudio, it's Katharina, it's Sergei, Thomas, and it's Andreas. So I owe them basically all the paper they read, all the ideas, all the effort they put in the crazy ideas I had to make them reality. So they are a great team, and I owe them a lot. I want to thank them honestly for their effort the last years.
When you go with the prototype of your solution to the market and you speak with your potential customers, what are the biggest challenges that you encounter in conveying the value of the solution?
Yeah, it's not easy to talk to customers because you need to find the right language. We are still probing to find the right thing. Our last try was to basically answer or ask 3 questions related to each stage of the causal ladder for their domain, to make them, see what kind of questions they can answer. They can get answers to. When I talk to people who have certain problems where they already match to our solution, is one common theme was transportability. For example, they have machines in different environments, and they have downtime. Nobody wants that their machine has downtime, and it's the same machine or almost the same machine, and here it comes. It's different climate conditions. Maybe this machine's operating different time into function. So on some parameters, they are identically or almost identically, but to others they are diverse. And this is a transportability scheme where you want to see if you can change your model towards what's same and what's different to answer questions. So this was heard from some manufacturing related companies that they have a problem in this domain.
So just to give those in our audience who are less familiar with the idea of transportability a little bit of an intuition, transportability is when we want to take conclusions from one context and apply them to another context, which is in itself a causal problem.
Vanilla example is you have a shop in Los Angeles selling surfboards. How would the surfboard selling be in New York? So some parameters are the same. You have the same surfboards, but you have different clients. They have different beach access and so on. So some things are similar and others are diverse, and you want to compare these things. And more often than not, to stress it, you compare, if you take non-causal approach, apples with peas, and that's problematic. And we basically want to recognize that's a pea in the apple, but we want to still press out what still can be done in this circumstances.
Do you feel that there is a need for more people with causal expertise in industry in general?
Definitely, I would say, and not only I'm working in this field, because basically when you don't use causality, you are at a certain point in a dead end. You will make wrong decisions, you will have implicit assumptions, you don't understand your data, and you don't make your decisions righteous. I mean, time after time, this will be important. And the first step is to accept that many models are just associative. So you basically just copycat everything which is there that works for many domains very good. But at some points, you will make decisions which are simply wrong. I have a famous example which is in mind, which is cited by Paul Hühnermund in his online course on Udemy, that Google basically wanted to analyze how is the gender pay gap, and they ended up in, I can read the story maybe in the internet, long story short, they raised the wage of men because they made a so-called Simpson paradox reverse. And so you take decisions, and even huge industries like Google, where you think they should be very prone and very skilled with handling data, even they take wrong decisions, because these connections between causality, storytelling, data scientists, and from this incorporated in making good decisions, this is something which is important. So every data scientist, everybody related with decisions, everybody related with complex systems will take huge profit now and even in the next years from causal mindset, from causal methods.
What resources, books or other resources, had the biggest impact on your causal journey?
It's quite common, I would say. I need to think if there is something extraordinary. But okay, let me cite the most common thing. I started with the book of Why, with the standard work Causality from Pearl, with the primer to have a little bit of shortcut from everything. I read the book from Schulkopf and Janzing, Causal Elements of Causal Inference. Especially 2 chapters with interventional and counterfactual queries. They have already good Python examples. Then, of course, the many toolboxes. So PGMPy I already mentioned. There are other great toolboxes. I can't cite them now, but there are, because they gap the bridge between it's a theoretical model and you actually can process something. And that, as a practical guy, has a huge impact on me. So causality is something where you can have the complete spectrum. You can be a philosopher and just use your mind, and you can be the hands-on practical guy who has a pot of data and want to process it. And all the spectrum is influenced and will be influenced by causality.
Where can people learn more about your and your team's work?
So we published a few papers, so that's, let's say, academic access to us. We are always happy, to discuss with you personally. So you just can email me or reach out for me. Probably we can link my email address or my team members. And we made, already LinkedIn excursions to, contact people from different industries to simply discuss their problems with us and see if this causal methods is, a perfect match. Because at this state where we are, we have a prototype, we have really great algorithms that start, but we need a pilot project where we can, one thing is the examples where what you do in a development project, and the other is to get real benefit in industrial setting. And to get nearer to this, we need an early adopter-minded customer who wants to discuss his problem with us, and we say, not easily, but if it's match, this is a match, and we can go through this. So you can contact me on LinkedIn, via email, we can have a short conversation. I'm very open to discuss this field, which I'm very close to.
Daniel, is there any question that you would like to ask me?
Oh, that's an unexpected one. I would need to think a moment. Of course, there are many questions. We know each other now a bit. We had a brunch together. But I know that you was into machine learning also through the Andrew NG course. And I was curious, what was your, transition from machine learning to causality? What brought you there? Maybe all the audience know already, but I'm curious, honestly.
That's a great question. My first encounter with causality was in 2017. We had a neuroscientific hackathon, and we're trying to translate the ideas of so-called functional connectivity. So how activities in different parts of brain might produce certain emergent qualities. We're wondering if these ideas can be applied to other complex systems like economy or social groups interactions and so on. And at some point, I realized working with different methods for analyzing associations like information theoretic measures and correlation and all this stuff. We're hitting a wall constantly because we didn't know, hey, actually, what does this mean that these things are related using this method and another method, maybe they are not related actually. So that was the first time when I started thinking about the importance of causal thinking. And then a couple of years later, I read the Book of Why. And that was the moment where I really felt I want to dive deeper into this. I was struck by the clarity of Pearl's framework and the clarity of his thinking in the book. Yeah, so that was my journey. And then I was so curious how to put this in practice. And that was around the time when Amit Sharma from Microsoft started developing DoWhy. So that was the first package that I started diving deeper into. What's your message for the causal community or causal Python community?
Oh, stay curious, stay experimental, look out what development brings us. Try this causal mindset. I think it's like a good virus, not a bad virus, a good virus. Once you are infected by this virus, it will be maybe a lifetime journey to, be curious, to have these high standards of making sense of things, answering difficult questions, and making things more understandable, proper, and better, I think. So, that's my message.
Great. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure, Daniel. I hope you will have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you, Alex.
Congrats on reaching the end of this episode of the Causal Bandits podcast. Stay tuned for the next one.
If you like this episode, click the like button to help others find it.
And maybe subscribe to this channel as well.
Stay causal.